Good morning. I'm Bob Gourley, and this is Bob's Truth Seekers. And we're deep in the hills of Pennsylvania for the official story of Wayne Swanger. How are you today, Wayne?
I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right. Can you tell us about your family heritage?
Family heritage.
Where were you born and raised?
I'm born in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, Franklin County. My grandparents, my mother and father, lived in that area, Chambersburg, Shippensburg area.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have two sisters.
Two sisters. And were you oldest, youngest, middle?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm from a working class family, factory and family farm and, laborers.
How, in my lifetime, you're the only Quaker I know. So how, tell me about the Quaker life.
Well, I think it's been quite a journey. I'm not a birthright Quaker. My parents were not Quakers. But I think in many ways I was a Quaker all my life, and I finally found my faith home many years later. I attended church. My parents were evangelical. My grandparents were also, and I attended church with my family and with my wife and children for years, and frankly listened to a number of sermons that I really didn't necessarily agree with, but I didn't want my kids thinking church was for old folks and children, and so I attended and just figured, well, I'll embrace what I embrace and reject what I reject, and then I got to a point where I needed fed, in terms of my faith, and then I decided to seek that home, and I found the Quakers, and it was like, oh, this is where I belong.
Well, Pennsylvania always was a Quaker state.
Mm.
So, how many kids do you have?
I have two sons.
Two sons. Okay. How's like a Quaker? They believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
Do they believe in Jesus?
Yeah, most. There's quite a variation in terms of Quaker faith. Practice is pretty similar, but faith differs in the fact that Quakers believe we're on our own journeys in terms of our faith. And so we're called seekers. Early Quakers were called seekers. And in seeking, sometimes we have some variations. So you can ask one Quaker and you'll get one answer and you'll find, but there are basic tenets that are embraced by all Quakers or we wouldn't be able to hold together.
Well, since this is a Truth Seekers, I was glad to hear that the Quakers are seekers.
They're seekers, that's
Okay.
embraced and followed.
How has your background shaped your values or worldview?
Well, that's there are a number of factors there. I think being raised in a poor working class family has had an impact in terms of, just remember in terms of finances, my parents always drilled into us, there's a big difference between need and want, in terms of, priorities. Debt was frowned upon. If you acquired and assumed any debt, you paid it off as quickly as possible, but you didn't assume debt if you didn't need to. So you saved and worked for what you needed. So that was, I think, one of the, certainly part of my bringing up. I think another, I have my background professionally, my career is in disabilities and special education. And I think that that had a real impact on my life. Seeing the diversity of personalities and human situations and conditions. And I think over time it made me more tender and more accepting and embracing of differences in people.
You mentioned about debt, like being frowned on. I think that America is a debtor nation, and we also believe that the less debt or no debt is far freer for you than being handcuffed in debt.
Well, at the individual level, I think it's I'm very conservative in terms of our finances. We always have been, my wife and I.
What drew you to the field of education?
I don't know. I've kind of been reflecting on that recently. I do write some, and I thought at one point, I really haven't written about my career in disabilities and my journey there until just recently. And when I think about it, I don't know what that sensitivity, where it came from, but I think my introduction to disabilities was the one experience I recall that was kind of the opening was when I was in high school. I heard that there was they needed adolescent volunteers, teenagers, to go to the adolescent ward at the Harrisburg State Hospital. And so for some reason I decided, well, I'm going to do that. And I went to the state hospital, the adolescent unit, and in some ways it was life-changing. I mean, the fact that, you see these individuals who, by no choice of their own, and their conditions, and not just the conditions that got them there, but the conditions that they were forced to live in at that time. I think that opened me up. And so I started, I worked as an orderly at the geriatric unit in the local hospital. And so my part-time jobs, and I had a lot of them because I had to pay my way through school, were always in the area of disabilities. And I think has had a lifelong impact on me. It opens you up. It makes you more sensitive to human need and differences, and again, what you need and what you don't need, and how you can just give and share. And it's just made me more open to that.
What high school did you graduate from?
Mechanicsburg.
And how many people graduate in your class?
Oh, I think about 250.
And then you went from Mechanicsburg High School to university?
I went to Shippensburg University, Shippensburg State at the time, as an undergrad, and majored in sociology.
And as from your earlier, you immediately knew you were going to go into like special needs or
No.
special education?
No.
No?
I had no idea.
When you graduated from college in Shippensburg, then what did you do?
Well, we got married the weekend before finals,
Oh.
which was pretty crazy. And again, as I was working my way through school, poor working class family, pretty much paid my tuition. I refused to borrow money from my parents. And I was always working part-time jobs, so the geriatric unit at the hospital, a social club for adults with developmental disabilities. My part-time jobs were basically with individuals with disabilities. But I was a social major because I just found it fascinating. And it was a liberal arts degree because I wanted to have a broad education. So we graduated. Mary was a German major and I was a social major. And we got married with very little. Let's put it that way. And So we had a job the first summer. We got married in May, started working at a old Adirondack camp in June. It was near the end of the summer, and I met someone at the camp who was a supervisor at an institution, private institution in Westchester. And we had talked at a campfire, and I told him about we were just talking about stuff we did, and he realized and heard the stories about me working with these children with disabilities. And so he called me up when he got home and said, I got a job down here in recreation if you're interested. And so we went down to Westchester. I worked at a private institution with adolescent boys 15 to 18 years old with severe emotional disturbance. And let's say I kind of cut my teeth there and learned a lot. And one of the things that I learned was I was pretty good at this. I mean, these kids were challenging. It was a residential setting, 15 to 18-year-olds. There were probably 13, 14 of them in a cottage. And I realized at the time I really didn't have any training. And my wife worked at a different unit. And we decided then that, hey, we need to get an education, some training in this area. So we went to Lehigh and got a master's degrees in special education. And there we go. Off we go.
You spent part of your career teaching spatial education at Clarendon University.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the biggest rewards and challenges?
Well, I taught in public schools for about 16 years in special education classrooms. I had prior experience with a range of disability age groups and severity in settings, institutions, camps, homes, So when I went to higher ed, and I didn't go necessarily willingly, there was an asbestos issue in the school district where I worked that caused me to finally walk away from that public school setting, and I went into higher ed. And I think the experience that I brought to the classroom in higher ed was a plus. And because, I had experienced, I had a great amount of experience, but I also brought dedication to this, that, hey kids, this isn't about your grade. This is about the competencies and skills you need. These kids you're going to be working with are relying on you. And in some cases, it's really a matter of life and death. You've got children with fragile health and physical issues. And so what I brought was a passion and an experience and a doggone rigid set of standards for kids. And I thought that was a strength. And I think it made me credible and,
Students have described you as being one of the most genuine, helpful, and passionate professors they've had. What teaching philosophy or approach do you credit for making such a strong impact on your students?
Well, again, I think stressing the fact to students, this isn't about your grades in this class. This is about knowing how to manage the needs of your students. And I think that was a strength. In fact, in my introductory class, the introductory course of disabilities, in that first class meeting, exercise, what we would do is I would say to the students, what would you do, how would you distribute the water if you were the only well in the village? And it was amazing what you would get. And the metaphor was basically, as a teacher in a special education classroom, you got to make some serious choices as to how you're going to distribute your attention and energies to these kids with all kinds of needs. And so, I don't have the answers for you, but by gosh, you better keep that in mind in your classroom, how are you going to manage these kids with, some kids with some extreme needs?
In your lifetime, the field of special education has evolved. What changes do you hope to see in the future?
Oh, Bob, it worries me a great deal right now. We did our master's degree in 75, started at Lehigh in 75, finished in 77. And in 1974, Public Law 94-142 was passed. And that was the law that basically established the requirement of an appropriate public education for all children. Because at that point, there were over 1 million children in our country who were not given an appropriate education. They were sitting there stringing beads, rather than learning functional skills in terms of, depending again on the severity of their disabilities. So the Department of Public Education was basically established to help meet the needs of those kids who were, the states were not servicing.
Left behind.
These kids were left behind, yes. And so the attack on, certainly any bureaucracy has problems and needs to be monitored and challenged and, cleansed of excess and waste and fraud and all that. That goes with the territory. But by abolishing a bureaucracy that has done so much good for so many children, I use an example. I had a child that I worked with. He was a child, he was 18. And when I would have to go to his home, his mother worked at night, but he was home. They had coverage there, but then I came in the morning and I'd get him up for school. Severe disabilities on the spectrum, autism. But I would go to his house, I would wake him up, I would help him get showered and prepared for school. He'd have breakfast, I'd walk him out to the car, the van that would pick him up, the van would take him to school. And at school, he was learning certain life skills that he could do to function independently. The school, after lunch, would take him to the recycle center, and he was learning how to sort recyclables. So he was being productive. After work, he'd come home, and if I was on that night duty, I'd meet him at the van, and I'd say, okay, what do you want to do today? And I'd say, do you want to go to the airport? Do you want to go to the mall? And so let's say he wanted to go to the airport. We'd go to the airport. It was a small community with a small airport. Jets would come in, the small commuter jets. And he'd stand there at the fence, and as they'd come in, he'd get all excited and worked up, just making noises and jumping. And the pilots would get off the plane, and they'd come around and say, hey, how you doing this week? And he'd wave and he'd get excited. He'd go in and talk to the people in the terminal. Not talk to them, but he'd be greeted by them. They knew him. So anyway, I'd take him home in the evening. He would have activities, with staff who would come or his family. That was back in 1990, it was probably 94, around there. In 1974, before Public Law 94-142, he would have been in that institution, the Harrisburg Adolescent Unit, and he'd be standing along a wall, flapping his hands, making sounds, self-stimulating, being called to get medicated, going to dinner, to be fed, and his days would be just that, Look at the difference in the richness of life. He wasn't being extremely productive, but he was as productive as he could be. And as human beings, isn't that what we should be doing? you know, that's money well used as far as I'm concerned. It sure beats a yacht or beat, you know, some luxury item. I mean, this is human basic needs. So anyway, run out of tape here. I'm sorry I get on my soapbox.
What does a typical day look like for you in retirement?
Oh, geez, there is no typical day. I decided when I retired I was not going to book myself with all kinds of obligations and duties. I do volunteer watershed books in Brookville on Wednesday afternoons, and I'll cover the used bookstore there. But otherwise, you know, try to work out 3 days a week, and I do some writing. During the summer, I garden, do some trout fishing. You know, I don't know. I kind of let the days happen.
It says like your poetry collections, like Filled of His Heart, and others published through the Watershed Journal, often evoke sights, sounds, and the soul of North Appalachian life. What inspires you to write, and how did poetry become a central part of your life?
Fields of His Heart is through the Watershed literary group. The other two books, Blessed Nonetheless and Dandelion Wine, and other poems from the Pennsylvania Wilds, were through Quimby, you know, a different publisher, so Cheshire. But anyway, I think what happened with the poetry is my writing. I was a very good writer in terms of academic work. I did my doctorate at Penn State, and they just crush you in terms of writing. I thought I could write before I got there, and they just tore me apart and built me again. And I did learn to write very well in terms of that academic style. And in fact, I was often asked to proof and do final edits of work for my colleagues. So after I retired, I threw out the APA manual, the American Psychological Association manual that you use to format all of your work and how you write, the protocol for writing, because that kind of writing, you don't have a voice. You know, you write objectively and you remove yourself from it because it has to be, you know, factual and objective, and it can't be biased in any way. So anyway, poetry is just finding and allowing your own voice to come out. So my poems are me, you know, not necessarily all my experiences, but certainly experiences that I've had, as well as experiences I've had vicariously in observing friends and others.
When you did your review of Wendell Berry's work, you highlighted themes of place, memory, and intergenerational ties. How do these show up in your writing?
You know, I really resist. Wendell Berry is head and shoulders, and probably greater than that in terms of his writing compared to me. I love his work, and I go to it, and I've had it on my desks for 40 years, you know, when I was first introduced to his writing. I mean, I don't try to emulate his writing at all, but I think the fact that I love his work is because his background overlaps some with mine. For example, his characters in his works of fiction are my mother's side of the family. You know, it just salt of the earth, rough around the edges, but caring community people who would do anything for you. they might have their opinions about this and that, but by golly, if someone who they might totally disagree with, they found in need, they wouldn't hesitate to give. And same way with my dad's family. I mean, they were rough around the edges, but by gosh, they were good people, And so Wendell Berry, he resonates with me, and I think my writing tries to, tap my roots, the people that I've met and seen, and what they draw out of me, over the years in terms of, just say tenderizing me, making me understand that, I'm not the one and all, these people are.
You've written about the value of short poems. What draws you to that form, and do you have any advice for aspiring poets that maybe feel intimidated by longer works?
Oh, I think short poems are delightful. In fact, you'll see a smattering of them if you come across any of the 3 books that I've written. And I think there's something about being concise, being parsimonious, and cutting to the chase, rather than being elaborate and losing yourself in a spiral of words. So I enjoy that when I can water it down not water it down, but condense it down to the point that, wow, this is what I want to say. Here's the nugget, here's the pith. This is good. And I came from, in high school, somebody gave me a copy of Kenneth Rexroth's poems from the Japanese and poems from the Chinese, and I still have them. Not the same books, because I'd give them away, and then I'd find that I needed them because I'd always go back and look at them again. So I still have those volumes on my shelf, but the Japanese just have such a beautiful way of, short forms, and they say so much, and they speak to individuals differently depending on the experience that you bring to them. So there's a beauty in those short poems, and they're ones you read and you say, oh, and then I've had people say, I read that, and then I've sort of let it season a little bit and think about it, and it's like, oh, I never, now I'm looking at it differently now, and there's just joy in that.
With your Quaker background and experience in education, what do you think themes like simplicity, community, peace, and social justice in today's world? What do you think about those things?
Well, that's, in terms of Quaker faith and practice, and the special ed background, I think we can live life for ourselves, and I think it's a much poorer life than if we live it in terms of thinking of others. In fact, Quakers sort of use, I'll call it guiding principles, and it's also sort of a litmus test as we measure decisions that we make. So if we have an issue, we'll take it into, a worship, for example, into the silence, and we'll sit. And the silence isn't the magic, it's what can occur within the silence, where you actually screen everything else out, and you're asking God for guidance, and you've got a challenge and an issue. It might be you, it might be others, it might involve all of you, but you're asking God's guidance, and so that silence helps clear your mind and your heart and seeking God's truth. Now, certainly you can deceive yourself. You can say, oh, yeah, well, God told me this. Well, these principles, I think, help test whether, one, before you act on them, whether they are likely to be truth. But also afterwards, you can test and say, well, by golly, they weren't. This was the right course or not, this was the wrong course. But those principles are peace, that the decision that you make is going to end up in a situation where we're all at peace. It's not a compromise where I'm sitting here grudging that I gave up this for that. It's the thought that we're aiming to have a situation where we're both content and pleased with the outcome. That's not easy, but it's worth the effort, and that's the goal. The other is integrity, that we're going to act in a manner that's honest and open. We're not going to deceive and go in the back door and sneak this or that. We're going to be honest with one another. We're going to treat each other as equals. Your health, your life situation is equal to mine. You're God's creature, so am I. I'm no better than you are. So I treat you that way. I don't dismiss you as being lesser or, whatever. I'm going to treat you, you're God's creature too. And finally, simplicity. That, we don't dilly-dally with a lot of complex things. Cut to the chase, do the right thing, and if it's the right thing, you'll know. If it's the wrong thing, you go back to work and try to meet those principles. Sounds simple, but it's you get a bunch of people together trying to make a decision, and they're acting on those principles. It can be a slog, but the outcome is a good outcome.
If you could share one piece of wisdom with listeners, whether from your time in the classroom, or your heritage, or your writing, what would it be?
Oh, mercy. Oh, I don't know. That's so complex. I think just being open. Life is a journey. Faith is a journey. Being open to admitting that you're wrong, that you've erred. Being open to the fact that you want to do the right thing regardless of how much it pains you. But just, I think just being honest with yourself. We can deceive ourselves so easily. And sometimes I hear rationalizations for behaviors that I would have heard on the playground in elementary school. It's like, wait a minute. It's because he's doing this or she's doing that. It's like, we wouldn't buy that from our children. We wouldn't buy that from, kids on the playground. Why are we allowed to think it's okay for us to do that? So I think being tender and open is so critical, and not being so daggone self-assured about everything.
Do you still have an English Swanger Spaniel?
Oh, I do. She's the joy.
Do you guys still go up to Indian Lake in New York?
We go to the Adirondacks every year. It's our happy place.
As a longtime volunteer at Watershed Bookstore, where you enjoy conversations and inspiration from readers nationwide, how has this role enhanced your post-retirement life?
Oh, certainly the activities at Watershed are a joy, and in fact, the Watershed Literary Group chose my book to publish back in 2020, my first book, and I would be forever grateful there. But, volunteering there on Wednesdays, Bob, you wouldn't believe, sometimes sitting there, and someone will walk in, and I'll sit there and I'll say, oh my gosh, here's somebody that needs a heart with an ear. Because they'll come in and they'll just start telling you stuff that they just open And it's like, okay, this is why I'm here. I'm not selling books today. I'm here because this is where I need to be. So I've met so many wonderful people, and it's just been it's been a joy. And sometimes I just come home to my wife Mary and say, "Well, you won't believe what happened today."
Is Mary a Quaker?
No, she isn't. She'll come to meeting on occasion and she'll come to events, and I go to the Presbyterian services with her on occasion. So we don't find them necessarily exclusionary.
Well, is there any other wisdom you'd like to share with the listeners?
I would hope that maybe someone will find a kernel somewhere in my long rambles here, but no, I appreciate sitting down talking with you, Bob.
Wayne, I think this is podcast number 118.
Oh boy.
So thank you for being part of it.
Well, thank you.
See ya.
See you.